Good morning. We are doing week 3 of Wills and Estates. So we're starting on chapter 4, which is the law of succession, death, testator, and testate. So there's a lot of vocabulary in this chapter. So I'm probably going to give you a few vocabulary words that I'm going to want you to fill out in this week's module, only because there's just a lot of new words that are part of this whole process. So let's start with when you die with a last will and testament. If you die with a last will and testament, you have died testate, T-E-S-T-A-T-E. That means that the probate court will work with whoever you have designated as your executor or the person who is going to administrate your estate to fulfill as best as possible your last will and testament. That's why we call it that. T-E-S-T is a root word, or is the root of a lot of words that we use in probate law. So testament, where you are telling the world what it is you want, your last will, your last desires, and testament, what you have put forth. Dying testate means you have died with a last will and testament, having said what it is you want. Testacy, T-E-S-T-A-C-Y, is the noun version of testate. So you have it is the idea that you and others have died with a last will and testament. Okay. There are a few things that you need to know about testacy. What constitutes a last will and testament is the first part, right? How are we going to know that you have died testate if we don't know what a last will and testament is? So there are lots and lots of, not lots and lots, there are different ways that you can put together a last will and testament. The first is holographic. And if you look on page 90 of your text, it describes what a holographic will. It is a holographic will is a will that's in your own handwriting. It's not typed up. It's not on a word processor. It can be on a napkin. A holographic will is in your own handwriting. Now, not every state accepts holographic wills. And the reason why is we want to avoid fraud. We want to make sure that we can read what is written. I don't know about you, but lots of times when I read other people's handwritings, I can't always discern what it is that has been written. So, not every state allows you to have a holographic will. Okay, but for those states that do, there are requirements. The first is that the will must be entirely written by the testator, and there's that root word again, T-E-S-T. Testator is the person who writes the last will and testament, okay? And because the testator is dead at the time that you're trying to interpret this holographic will, you don't have anybody to tell you, oh, that's what I meant. Okay, so the last will and testament has to be completely written in the testator's handwriting. The testator must have a clear intent to make this handwritten document a last will and testament. It's not enough if you're out and you have a few too many milks at the bar and on a napkin you scribble, if I die, my best friend gets my record collection. that's not a last will and testament. There's no intent there. That there's nothing that says, hey, I intend for this to be a last will and testament. And that's really the language that we have in a last will and testament that lets everybody know that's my intent. Okay? If I die, my best friend gets my record collection. Could be because of a bet. It could be because of a joke. We don't know because the intent is not demonstrated in writing in that same instrument. So that has to be there for a holographic will to be valid. Okay? The signature of the testator must be at the end of the holographic will. Again, if I've scribbled on a napkin, my best friend gets all my records, how do I know that's the end of anything? And what if it's not even signed? So a signature is required. And the handwritten will, the holographic will, has to be dated. That's because, and we're going to get into this later, if I do a holographic will today and next week I do another one, the one that I've written first goes away. We have to know the date that everything is written so that we know when this particular last will and testament, its efficacy is a question. Because again, if I write a will today and I write one next week's wins. And we have to know by the dates. So those 4 things have to be in a holographic will in order for it to be valid only in those states that allow holographic wills. Okay? Another kind of last will and testament is called a non-cupative or oral last will and testament. How do we do that? Well, we videotape it. There are very few states that will allow an oral last will and testament. Typically what happens with a last will and testament that is videotaped or recorded is somebody is reading their last will and testament that they have written. Some people think that that's a nice thing to put in place for people they leave behind. They can hear their voice. Everybody knows that that was exactly what they intended. Especially with something like a holographic will, if you do those 2 in tandem, there's no question about what's handwritten. We don't have a question about, hey, I can't read that word. Well, we have it in that person's own words, in their own voice. And so usually an oral last will and testament is done in tandem with a written one. Sometimes a last will and testament that's oral, that's done in tandem with a written one, has some nice touches on it. So let's say in my last will and testament, I do leave my best friend all of my records. I can then embellish and say, I want you, when you play this record, to remember me. Or do you remember when you said this was your record and I said it was mine and I ended up getting it? Well, you're finally getting it back. Things like that you can embellish upon. You can put your personal touch on the reading of the oral or the reading of the written last will and testament. Which one will control the written one, but the oral one is kind of a nice corollary. Sometimes people who have been terminally ill will do these because they know that that their death is imminent, and they have special things that they want to say to the people that they leave behind. Okay. The next kind of last will and testament is a statutory will. What is that? Well, every state has statutes, laws, and there are always provisions within a state's set of statutes that say what has to be in place for a last will and testament to be valid. That's really all we mean by a statutory will. we mean a last will and testament that meets all of the requirements of that particular state for that will to be a valid last will and testament. Okay? Another one that your book goes over is a joint and mutual reciprocal will. And husbands and wives, spouses generally will do reciprocal wills. I leave everything to you. If I die first, you leave everything to me. If you die first, and those are again statutorily required. It is just one kind of a statutory will, but it's one that's used quite frequently because, especially husbands and wives, when they don't have children or they don't have a ton, they'll leave everything to each other. Okay? Your book on page 93 has a sample basic last will and testament for the state of Wisconsin. And that is something that you can look at. We're going to go ahead, we're going to draft a last will and testament as we go forward. Okay? Now, your book goes through a living will. What is a living will? It's really kind of the opposite of a last will and testament. A living will is your directive on what it is that you wish to have done if you are alive and can't speak for yourself. It is where you designate somebody to make decisions on your behalf. It is also where you designate what you want as far as end of life directives. So do you want to have nutrition? Do you want to have hydration? Do you want to have medication? Those are things that you can do and should do while you're alive so that you can control in some way what would happen if, God forbid, you're in a situation where you can't speak for yourself in your end of life. So everybody knows what your wishes are while you are still alive, at least for medical purposes. Okay, a living will is really just a medical directive for when you can't speak for yourself. Okay, it's important to have one. You never know. You don't want, if you don't want to be given food when you can't speak and someone's doing that, well, you had an opportunity to tell them that you didn't want that. It's important that you also let everyone around you know what your wishes are, especially with adult children. Sometimes it's tough when their elderly parents are in the last stages of life and they want to prolong that person's life as long as possible, and that person doesn't want that. So to save your loved ones a lot of grief, you want to make sure that you let the world know what your directives are. And that's what a living will is. I'm going to give you a link this week for a living will so that you can complete it, make a copy of it, put it in your glove box, give a copy to your physician. It's important that you have one of those things. But this is something that will allow you to have a little bit of control over what happens to you, much in the same way as you have a last will and testament. You want to make sure that the whole world knows what it is you want, right? Okay. Now, let's move on to what goes into a last will and testament. Well, you're basically telling the world where you want your stuff to go and what you want to happen to your children, your minor children. Okay? Now, there are 3 different kinds of ways you can dispose of your property in a last will and testament. They are a bequest, a legacy, or a devise. Okay? Let's start with legacy. A legacy is also a bequest. Um, it is specific. There's a specific legacy. So if I have a 2022 Kia Telluride and I put in my last will and testament, I leave my 2022 Kia Telluride to fill in the blank. That is a specific legacy. I'm specifically naming what I am giving and specifically naming to whom I am giving it. Okay? The next kind of gift that you can put in your last will and testament is a specific devise. A specific devise is a specific gift of a real property. And again, what we're doing is we are specifically naming the piece of property and specifically naming to whom the property is being gifted. Okay? A demonstrative legacy is a gift of money. Okay? And that is where I will give a specific dollar amount to a specific person. A general legacy is a gift of money, but it is less specific. There are examples of this on page 98, where I give a sum of $20,000 to my niece if she survives me. Okay? If you have "if she survives me" in there, it becomes a general legacy. Okay? Now, in every last will and testament, we are going to make a provision just in case someone doesn't want something that I'm gifting to them, or they have died before I have. And so you want to have what's called a residuary legacy. That means if anything is left over after I've gone through this whole list of people or entities to whom I am giving gifts, and there's anything left over, I want it to go to fill in the blank. Now, generally when we do this, it's to some kind of a charitable organization, like the YMCA, like the Red Cross. And you can direct that whatever's left, sell it and give the money to whomever, or you can say, hey, if there's anything left, let this charitable entity see if they can use it, and if they can't use it, they can sell it, or you can sell it and give them the money. You can be as general or specific as you wish with a residuary legacy, but the important thing is that you have it in there. And here's why. If there's money left over, if there's anything left over after you've given everything that you think away, whatever's left over, if you don't have a residuary legacy, goes to the state. That's called escheat, E-S-C-H-E-A-T, E-S-C-H-E-A-T. Why is that a big deal? First of all, the word cheat is in escheat. The state is going to cheat and take everything that's left over. I don't know about you, but I haven't worked my whole life to give everything to the state of Ohio. I just haven't. I would much rather direct that anything that's left over be sold and the money given to some charitable organization. Okay? So make sure that there is a residuary legacy in your last will and testament to make sure that there's no question about what should happen if anything is left over. Okay? So those are the specific kinds of gifts that go into a last will and testament. What if I don't have enough money to make the gift? Or what if I sold my car and I have a different car now? What happens if my last will and testament cannot be administrated with everything going where I wished it to go, because the facts on the ground don't match what the last will and testament says. Well, that's when the court kind of gets involved, okay? And there are 3 different things that the probate court can do when the facts on the ground don't match what's in your last will and testament, okay? Those 3 things are redemption, lapses, and abatement. So let's go through this. An redemption is where you think you're giving something to someone, but it doesn't exist anymore. Okay? What happens is the court can cancel that gift altogether and deliver the gift to somebody else or substitute the gift. Right? If the person who's supposed to get the gift isn't around, the court can substitute somebody in there. They can just cancel the gift altogether, or they can say, hey, it looks like the intent of the testator was this. This is pretty close. So let's look at some examples. So what if I have a car and I've named it in my last will and testament, but since I did my last will and testament, I bought a new car? The court can substitute. Okay? And that is called an redemption. What if I was going to give money to a church and that church doesn't exist anymore? The court can look at the document and say, well, that church doesn't exist anymore, but the testator, before she died, went to this church. I'm going to substitute that church for the one that doesn't exist anymore. Okay? There are some examples in the book. In her will, Elizabeth leaves Arnold her champion thoroughbred racehorse Secretary. Secretary dies before Elizabeth. The gift of the horse is deemed by extinction. The horse doesn't exist anymore. There's really no substitute for the horse, so the court cancels it. Okay? Here's another example. In her will, Elizabeth leaves Arnold the horse, but she sells or gives the horse to another person before she dies. Again, the horse is deemed by extinction. Right? The testator, before they died, before Elizabeth in this example died, did something completely the opposite of what it says in the last will and testament. Well, when you're alive, your intent is clear that you were going to sell it, and you didn't even give the money to the person you were going to give the horse to. You gave it to the money to somebody else. You just didn't change your last will and testament. And so what the court does is basically cancels that out. Okay? All right. The next thing that the court can do when facts on the ground don't match what we're looking at with the last will and testament is a lapse. A lapse is the failure to pass or distribute a gift in a will because the beneficiary dies before the testator. What do we do? What do we do? Well, in most states, the court will give that to someone else, saying that that particular gift has lapsed. Now, what can you do in your last will and testament so that just in case the person you leave something to dies? Well, what you can do is put an alternate beneficiary. And this is something that you do when you draft a last will and testament. So if I say I leave my couch to Sarah, but if Sarah dies before me, then give it to Benjamin. And if Benjamin dies before me, then put it in my residuary make it a residuary devise. Okay? So what have I done by doing that? I have avoided the issue of lapse because I've given the court option 1, option 2, and option 3. What I've said is I'm making sure there's not going to be a lapse there. Okay? So you've got to make sure when you're drafting a last will and testament that you anticipate problems because you're not going to be there to clear it up. And you want to make sure that you have been very clear in what your intent is so that the court doesn't have to step in and clean it up. You know, it's a judge that you've never met kind of trying to figure out what you wanted. So make sure in the last will and testament you're very, very clear. Okay? Now the last thing that a court can do when the facts don't match the last will and testament is abatement. Now abatement stinks. Because what it means is you owe money when you die. And let's say you owe taxes. Taxes don't go away when you die. What happens is the court takes assets that you have, pays your taxes, and then divides things up. So if I owe taxes or child support or spousal support when I die, I better make sure I have enough cash on hand to make that good. Otherwise, the court is going to go in and pay that at 100 cents on the dollar, even if it means taking away from someone that I had named as a beneficiary in my last will and testament. So if I owe child support and I have left $5,000 to my neighbor, but I owe $5,000 in child support, the court's going to say, I'm really sorry, neighbor, you don't get anything. That's been abated. It's been abated because there's another obligation that the estate has to satisfy before you can get your specific devise or legacy. Okay? And it doesn't have to be just money. It could be, when I say that the court can abate anything, let's say that you owe $5,000 in child support when you die. There's no cash in your bank account, but you own a car. The court's going to sell that car to pay the child support. Even though in your last will and testament it says the car goes to Susie, Susie's not going to get the car. Or Susie's going to get what's left over from selling the car once the child support obligation is paid. It's an abatement. It's a reduction of what is your legacy or your devise in your last will and testament. Again, this is another reason why you have to clean up your messes before you go. Because what you're doing is you're creating another mess for the court to clean up. And be advised that it's not just the $5,000 that is going to go. There's going to be increased attorney's fees. It's going to take forever. There's going to be interest that is going to be charged by whatever entity you owe money to, either taxes or for child support or spousal support. There's interest that accrues too. So the longer it takes, the more the interest accrues. It's a mess. So make sure that you have your debts in order so that the court doesn't have to step in and do an abatement and basically throw your last will and testament out the window because you didn't have enough money. Excuse me. Now on page 102, there is a sample last will and testament. And then there's a review of it and an assignment. I'm going to assign assignment 4.1 in your book on page 104 and 105. And that goes with the fact pattern and the sample last will and testament that's in your book. You're also going to have some vocabulary for this week. And in the discussion, I'm going to have you discuss a living will. Okay? So there are a few things that you're going to have to do this week for this. We're going to start on page 105 next week with intestacy and with the law of succession. That is a bit more complicated, and it's going to take a little bit more time, so that's why I'm splitting this chapter up. Okay, so make sure that you check the discussion for this module. Make sure that you look at the link for the living will, that you do your vocabulary assignment, and that you do this assignment 4.1. Okay, if any questions, please let me know.